The death of socialism has been celebrated so many times, it's getting boring. Every time the death of socialism has been announced over the last 150 years, lo and behold, it rears up again like some bad, scary movie in which the dead thing comes to life and frightens you. And so socialism is now coming back in all kinds of ways. The works of socialism, the characters of socialism. I'm going to give you 3 examples. You could pick up anything. The Atlantic Monthly magazine the other day, literally a week ago, has one of its contributing editors, a young woman whose name I've forgotten. Does someone know, can help me? No one saw that? Well, you should. She writes something, and they also make a video, which is on the Atlantic Monthly website. Very nice. She speaks for about 10 minutes, 12 minutes, not very long. And the topic is late capitalism. I kid you not. And she explains that this is a term that has a history that includes Karl Marx. It's got a history that includes, what is her name? You know her name. You're forgetting too, okay. And she goes through the history of, but the remarkable thing, she does a good job of it, a good history, she's got her information correct, but she's friendly to the whole thing. This is an interesting idea, she says, and she shows it. It comes right out of the socialist literature, the Marxist literature. I found that arresting. That's a major magazine in this country, the Atlantic Monthly, and has been for many decades. That's the first thing. The second thing was, which some of you I think noticed, is that I did an appearance a week ago Monday on Fox News. I did that. Fox Business News in the morning, Stuart Varney, I believe is the name, Stuart Varney, which I invite you to see. It's available on YouTube, on our websites, and so on. And there he is, Mr. Varney, who prides himself on being a right-winger, asking me softball-type questions about socialism. Couldn't I tell him why it's growing these days, says Mr. Varney. And there we are, having this conversation in front of however many people watch that program. I have no idea. Do you know?
It's at least 100, 150,000 live.
Okay. And there we are, having a conversation about socialism and Marxism. It's kind of interesting. And the third example is that in a number of European countries right now, the latest edition of Karl Marx's Capital is getting close to bestseller status. It's selling huge numbers of copies. So what's going on here is a kind of interesting question. I could have given you, but I've talked about it before, so I don't want to repeat it, recent polling here in the United States that indicates people that are 35 and under in the United States, when asked the following question: which do you prefer, capitalism or socialism? A majority now say socialism. Here in the United States, young people. And that's consistent with everything that I see as I travel around the country giving talks. So let's talk a little bit about what all of this means. First, here's what it doesn't mean. It's not really a serious embrace yet of socialism, mostly because there is very little understanding or knowledge about what socialism is. People who are 35 and younger today means they've been in school for the last, whatever it is, 15, 20 years, which means they've been exposed mostly to teachers who don't know anything about it, who even if they knew something are afraid to spend much time at it, and who are super afraid to go into it in a way that might be deemed as positive or friendly or sympathetic. So they just don't know. They just don't know. It's a very serious issue. So what that vote for socialism over communism really means is we don't like what we got. And we know that what we got is capitalism. We don't like this. So you give us a choice between what we have and something else, we'll go with something else, and then we'll figure out later what that exactly is. If they do know something, what they probably know is a little bit about the Soviet Union or China or Cuba or something like that. And given the sources from which they have gotten that information, most of that information is negative. It's, they're dictatorial, they don't have democracy, they are whatever, poor, or whatever negatives have been associated with them. So we're dealing here with a disaffection from capitalism that is massive. It's massive in Europe, it's massive here, and it's pretty strong in many other parts of the world. Stronger than it's been in a long time. But it doesn't know quite where to go, this anti-capitalism, this criticism. It isn't inclined to go towards what it sees as socialism a la Russia, China, Cuba, because it has bad associations with those things, if it knows anything. Certainly those societies have done enough bad things to make it relatively easy to paint them in bad colors and negative colors. So between what has been said bad about them and what they've done that isn't attractive, this is not where people seem to want to go. There'll always be some, but it's not where the general flow of disaffection from capitalism is taking people. Well, then where is it taking people? Well, it will take them in the direction of a socialism if that socialism tells everybody, we're not the Soviet Union, we're not China, we're not Cuba, we're not any of the bad associations we have, and the best way to do that is to stick an adjective in front of it that everybody knows is a good one. Therefore, the first choice will be democratic socialism. That's if you can't choose between vanilla and chocolate, you ask at the ice cream store for one scoop of the chocolate. Because that avoids the difficulty. So now we have democratic socialism, and we have here in the United States a major purveyor of that particular move. There are actually two. One is Bernie Sanders, because he's the public figure of democratic socialism. And the other one is the organization Democratic Socialists of America, which is very proudly saying these days that they have exploded in their membership and have 25,000 members across the United States and are therefore the biggest left-wing organization, which is probably true. So we have socialism what? We have socialism light. We have locale socialism. But that's not surprising. If you're moving towards that, you want to take it slowly, take it gradually, take it moderately. The important thing is people are going in that direction. We'll see how far they go. There'll be all kinds of struggles about how far they go. The first thing I want you to kind of get at is there's an immense learning process that has to unfold now. You can see it already underway. Literally, to our amazement at Democracy at Work, the lectures I sometimes give or other people that I engage with, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are eagerly watching these things on videos. The interest is there, like the students were always there. The interest is there. But what has changed in America is that the larger atmosphere makes that interest okay. There's even a generational twist to this. As younger people listening to their parents' generation poo-poo all this are even more interested precisely because of that. It's like the parents, you must not go in that room becomes so attractive. You can't hold on to yourself. Well, as I was once told, I had this moment I will give you as a story because it articulates the situation. I was giving a talk somewhere in the Midwest, and it was some years ago now, and I came to the part about socialism, and I finished, and a couple of hands shot up, and a young man who looked very nervous stood up, and I was sure that I was going to get one of those responses that I was used to from years ago. I would give a talk on some subject having to do with socialism or communism, and I would finish, and up would stand someone who wanted me to say bad things about Stalin. And I would try to explain, yes, there's terrible things about Stalin, but it's not relevant to what I just spent an hour talking to you about. Could we talk about that? He would sit down, another person would get up and say, what about the Stalin? Oh, no. And I would have then to spend a lot of time talking about something I wasn't prepared for and wasn't really germane to what I was trying to get across, because people had been trained, socialism, Marxism, Stalin, murder, awful, awful, awful. And the basic question they were asking me is, you seem like a nice guy, how come you're talking awful? and I would have to say something which was this subtle equivalent of, I'm not awful. which sounds as lame as it is, you know? That was no fun for me. So I do my talk, and the young man stands up, and I thought, oh no, one of these, because he had that little nervousness that you get if you're going to give a talk. And it was being videoed, so there was light on the young man. And he started talking, and I realized he wasn't asking that question at all. He was basically saying, he danced around it, but his basic question was, very honest, what is socialism? He had no idea. But he knew enough to know that by asking me, he's asking somebody who's now going to give him a not awful story. I realized in that moment that the world had changed in this country. That these young people, they really didn't know, and they would like to know. It was wonderful. I then proceeded to give a glowing description of socialism in the hopes that he would find it attractive, which he seemed to do. That's where we are. We are now, and by the way, who gets the credit for this change of mentality in America? Capitalism gets the credit. Capitalism is our best organizer, second only to Donald Trump, to whom I now give the thanks that he deserves for irritating, outraging people who become therefore willing to consider all kinds of people and thoughts they would have before thought they shouldn't maybe pursue, but they are very important. Now, the next point about capitalism and socialism follows. Suppose you ask the simple question, what is socialism? Or for that matter, what is Marxism? The best answer I ever heard is the one I'll give you now. It is capitalism's shadow. You know the old fairy tales about trying to get rid of your shadow? There were various characters, little children's book about an animal that tries to get rid of its shadow, and you teach the child, you can't do that. The shadow is part of you. You can't shake the shadow. Socialism and capitalism have always been the institution and its irremovable shadow. Nothing guarantees the future of socialism as much as capitalism. They are each other's twins. The notion that you're going to get rid of that frightening shadow makes as little sense in the relationship between capitalism and socialism as it makes in your attempt to get rid of your shadow when there's light in the world. You can't do it. Capitalism produced socialism. Karl Marx, who still gets the respect he deserves because he was the greatest theoretician, not the only one, he's not enough, but he's something around which you kind of have to wrap your head, because not to is to make a fire by rubbing sticks together when there are matches available. You know, use Marx. He did a lot of work based on a lot of people. Not to study him is childish. It's just ignorance compounded with malevolence, and it's above all stupid. And you don't want to be stupid. But you look around capitalism, you look around what we just talked about for the last hour, and you have got to believe that we can do better than this as a human race, because if you didn't believe it, you'd probably jump off a bridge. You've got to believe, and most of you do. Maybe all of you do, somewhere. But you've got to let that little bird fly. You've got to say, oh, yeah, we can do better. I'm sorry, I know it sounds like Obama's yes, we can. I didn't plan that. But we can do better. We can do better. And the impulse of socialism has always been that. Final points on this. What is socialism? Because we're really at the beginning. The answer is socialism is many things. And don't let anyone, including me, ever leave you with the impression that there is socialism. The remarkable thing about socialist ideas and Marxist ideas, and they're not the same. There's a big overlap, but they're not the same. But the remarkable thing about both of them is that from the early to the middle part of the 19th century, which is not very old, socialism and Marxism spread in a way faster and more global than any other comparable way of thinking across the planet. You compare the spread of Marxism with the spread of Christianity or Islam or any of the other global movements that started from somewhere and spread, then Marxism and socialism are stunning. They spread to every corner of the planet in less than a century. Less than a century. Anything, any social movement, any way of thinking that spreads to so many different places in so short a time, involving people in such different cultures and religions and levels of economic life and family structure, is going to, of course, be interpreted differently by these people shaped by their circumstances. So, of course, there are lots of Marxisms and lots of socialisms. One of the first things you can understand is if you are in the presence of a person who starts talking about socialism and Marxism as if it's in the singular, talk to somebody else. Because that person is either ignorant or trying to hustle you into believing that whatever it is they think it is the only way one could or should think about it. That's not true. I wish it weren't that way. It'd be really nice if there was a place you could go and this is it. Or if there was an agency that said, this is correct, this is wrong, this is the right one. There is no such agency. For a short time, after the Russian Revolution in 1917, very short time, there was such an agency. The Russians were the first Marxists to actually pull it off. They made a revolution, 1917. Nobody could believe it. Up until then, socialists had tried, but they had never been able to kind of take over. They had tried, but they hadn't worked. They had tried with violent revolution. They had tried with electoral strategies. Some countries, they went quite far. Germany was the best, Austria, but they never quite... The Russians were the first ones. And so they got an unbelievable loyalty. Everyone around the world who had begun to figure out what socialism was said, of course, they must have the magic recipe because they did it. They're in charge. So for a short time, whatever they said Marxism was, everybody said, that's it. And people who said, no, I don't see it that way, were immediately branded as something evil. You know, the split between socialists and communists didn't exist until after the Russian Revolution. There were no such things as communist parties. Let me say that again so you all understand. Before the Russian Revolution, everybody was a socialist. But after the Russian Revolution, because of the enormous respect that Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin got as the leaders of this thing, the ones who actually won, I mean, some of you are looking at me. Why are we all interested in Bernie Sanders? Because he did so well. Other than that, he would have been a strange old man from a state that has more cows than people. Right? We wouldn't have taken him seriously. But he did it. He showed us that a person with the name socialist attached to himself can actually get millions of votes in America, which is very important for us to see. But try to keep that in your mind. When Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky emerged from the chaos of World War I in charge of what is the largest landmass country on this planet, Russia is bigger by geography than any other country in the world, people were flabbergasted. And so after the war, socialists split. Those who thought we have to do exactly what these guys tell us because they know how to do it, they did it. But there were a lot of other people who didn't agree with this or that, and they split. And the ones who didn't agree kept the old name socialist. And the ones who wanted to be loyal to the Soviet Union, as the great leader, took a different name to underscore their difference from the others, and that's when the Communist Party began. Communist Party all over the world starts in 1919, 1920, 1921, the years immediately after the Russian Revolution. Otherwise, there is no. And that was the issue for them. The Soviet, well, you have to get all of this, because if you don't understand that, you don't understand the history that will now flow. The communists and the socialists were angry at each other because they disagreed about this. Loyalty to the Soviet Union became a crucial part of the history. That's why China lines up with Moscow until they have their split in 1960. That's the history of this. We all have to learn that again, not the details, but to have a sense of what it is. What were the issues? The Russians and the socialists disagreed. The Russians thought the government should own and operate everything. The socialists said that's not necessary. I'll conclude with this story. In Germany, there's a terrible struggle going on right now. They're having a terrible problem. It may cost Mrs. Merkel her election, and she's very popular. Here's the problem. Their biggest industry is the producer of automobiles. VW, Mercedes-Benz, all of that. Those companies, over the last 10 years, have violated every single norm of decent behavior you could ask of any corporation. They have stolen money. They have faked their emissions control so that they've polluted the air with millions of cars that they deliberately phonied and have admitted to this. I'm not making any of this up. They have done and they're the biggest employer, and they're the richest, and they were abetted at every point by the political structure of what? Of the Christian Democratic Union, that's Merkel's party that runs Germany, but also of their governing party, the SPD, which is German for Sozialistische Partei Deutschland, the German Socialist Party, which is a partner with her. Last week, that partnership was really rocked when a leading German official of the Socialist Party, named Wein in Saxony, a very important part of Germany, was caught out by a newspaper having given this parliamentary speech he made about the automobile companies and what should be done to make them behave properly. Before he read it in Parliament, he had given it to the executives at VW to look over it to see if it was okay. You couldn't have had a more slavish behavior of a socialist, because in that country, socialism means the government controls things to make capitalism a little less harsh than it might otherwise be. For them, that's what socialism is. Communism is some evil excess that they don't want to have anything to do with. We're going to have to relearn just the broad outlines of that so that we can what? Come up with a socialism, something better than capitalism, some way to organize society differently. In order to do that, we have to go through the effort of understanding where we've been as a movement, even though it's been repressed in this country. It hasn't everywhere else. Every European country, you talk to people, they know the difference between a socialist and a communist because it's part of their life, and it has been for 50 years. Only Americans don't get that. Think that this is an argument about how you spell something instead of an article of substance. Very last point, I promise. I promise. Key to all of it, from my perspective, is Marx's insistence in Capital and that of the people that have followed him since, that you're not going to change a society in the direction of liberty, equality, fraternity, freedom, democracy, and all of that, unless you put that at the base of society in the place where most adults spend their lives, at work. And it's probably also true, although Marx didn't go at it, that you also have to transform the other place people spend most of their life besides work, and that's the household and the family. You have to change those institutions, because if you don't, all the other changes you make will be brought back to where they were, because you've not transformed the work relationships and the interpersonal relationships of a home. And that's the biggest problem that socialism has to face, how to conceive that, how to present that as a route to a really different society. But the help we will have doing it is that the existing society is falling apart. There is no nice way to say it. But you already know it. All I'm doing is putting it into words, which may be something that frightens you a bit, which I understand. Frightens me when I hear myself say it. It's over. It's over. We had a good run. Capitalism did nicely, 200-300 years. We are on the other side of the hill. We are going down. That's why the governor of Arkansas is excited to have 400 jobs paying $14 to $15 an hour for his people. That's called a low bar. Really low. Thank you very much, and I hope I see you next month.